I haven't talked to everybody yet, have I? It's always good to see your smiling faces, and the fellowship that's here is so confirmed by all the chattering that we have between each other. It's a beautiful noise. Oh, thank you, Jace. Hello, Susan, can you hear me? I got Jace to thank for reminding me to turn this thing on. Oh, a little slow, but I am smarter than this little machine. Now, if you could remember the previous 3 Sunday classes, I started out with certain things. This morning, I'm going to let you tell me. Well, actually, I'll put it this way. I'll skip my usual introduction if you can tell me the Old Testament book, chapter, and verse that I have y'all take turns reading. Right, the 23rd book of the Old Testament, Isaiah. You know, I always look for ways to remember things, and if you got a tooth pulled, it's like you say Isaiah. Well, if you take the 2 and the 3, you know, it's like a tooth laying on its side. So, dumb things that I used to come up with to teach my daughter certain things to help her memory. Well, good. Somebody didn't want me to do the usual, but you know what? You probably remember what I make. The point that I make is that our thoughts are not God's thoughts. His ways are not our ways. We can't be blending the way we've always done things with the way that he wants things done. The Galatians were dealing with these problems, and Paul, in his wisdom and Holy Spirit encouragement, was able to deal with them like a parent with a child, you know, in a severe way. It's like probably the closest thing to spanking the Galatians is what he did when he wrote this letter. My left hand, we still shake. I have some questions first of all, I didn't look forward to talking about all these negative things, but you know, we have to be aware of them so that we can recognize them. They will all be like anger. They will be gauges, signals to us where we're at. So the question is, what is stronger, the spirit or the flesh? What would your answer be? It depends which one you encourage. It seems that if you look for something, you can find it, even though you're looking for something else. It's like me. I'm all the time misplacing. I try to put things lay things down in a place where I will remember where they are, but it takes much effort to remember how systematic that is. It's not. Well, personally, I think that the Spirit is stronger, especially because it's been promised. Jesus is going to help us. God is faithful. He's not going to allow us to be in situations, to remain in situations unless it's our choice. And so we're dealing with the Galatian problems. And as usual, I don't really organize my thoughts. I thought it was interesting that in the reading this morning, that last part of the fruit of the Spirit in verse 23 says, against such there is no law. There is no law against such. So it makes me think that maybe that's why the law is here. The law is to tell us what we cannot do. And of course it tells us what to do so that we won't do those things. But yet, on the other hand, this previous list, I love that it ended with, and such like. It makes it like a, I think it makes it like a bookend with the beginning verse. Where it says, I don't see where it's worded, but the deal is, it's obvious, it's clear. You can see the lust of the flesh. You could figure it out. It comes natural. It's a form of righteousness to be able to know that cheating on your mate is wrong. You should be faithful to her. Getting angry is wrong, because how many times does that turn out good? These are natural things that we are born with the ability to discern. I mean, there's a part in Romans where it says that we could have figured out there must have been a greater entity, a God that created all these things. They didn't just happen. Yet, Galatia was a place full of idols and all kinds of things that they have been, I can't think of the word, desensitized. They have been desensitized to. Christianity was such a new concept to them. What? We can't get drunk anymore? What? We can't have a good time at a party? What? We can't participate in immorality in any way, shape, or form? So even though a lot of these thoughts are natural to us who are trying to honor God, be instruments of good works, these Galatians and people that we run into today, they keep trying to blend their past life with this new life of Christianity. And so it was a necessary thing that Paul had to list. And there is no complete list, because otherwise, where it says, and such like, they might have put in, and stay away from computer porn. Stay away from Bud Light. It's still alcohol. Well, hopefully I got the preaching out of the way. And again, once again, thank you, Chris, for preaching the lesson today. We can zoom over it real fast. I wanted to read from the easy to read version. I had it marked. One of the little things I remember about Bible book orders, and I believe all you parents should be teaching your children the books of the Bible. I've told a few that tell me all the New Testament books. I'll give you $1. If you can say it faster than I can, I'll give you $5. But I don't know that it's sunk into their heads yet, and I don't know what kind of incentive you would use with your children, but you need to know. It's like when you deal with Galatians, Ephesians, popcorn, Philippians, Colossians. Somebody told me a long time ago, go eat popcorn. G for Galatians, E for Ephesians, P for pop, and C for corn. You know, just little things like that help me with my memory. And, you know, children, they need all the help they can for memory. So, Galatians 5, verse, I'm going to start with verse 19 and read to 21. And this is from the easy to read version. and I'll be pausing at each particular sin. If you have a different version that maybe hits it more on the head or says it in a clearer way, be sure to just speak out when I pause. The wrong things are sinful. The wrong things our sinful self does are clear. He goes on to list them. Doing sexual sins, not being pure, doing morally bad things, worshiping false gods, doing witchcraft, hating, making trouble, having jealousy, being very angry, being selfish, making people mad at each other, making divisions, having envy, being drunk, having wild and wasteful parties, and doing other things like this. I warn you now, like I warned you before. The people who do these things will not be in God's kingdom. I thought that was well put in that version. So now we have a choice. We go through these lists.
Brother Wayne?
Yes, sir.
One of the things I kind of like the way he says it in the book, back in verse 16, he's talking about, walking in the Spirit, and you will not carry out the desires of the flesh. He says the whole thrust of this context is to admonish Christians to recognize the warfare in our heart between the flesh and the Spirit. We need to recognize that ourselves, right? That there's a war going on, and it's something that we've got to every day. We've got to constantly battle this, right? This is something we got to make sure we're putting on the Spirit, walking by the Spirit. Because if not, if we don't do that, we don't conscientiously do that and work on that, guess what? We will fulfill the desires of the flesh. And so there is a war going on, and that's the thing we need to know it ourselves as parents, but we need to teach our children that too. They need to understand that. If we just kind of go through life, just kind of whatever, here and there, then we're going to be doing the things of the world, the things of the flesh. And so we've got to make sure that we understand there's a warfare going on.
I remember that people watching on YouTube may not hear what y'all say, so be sure to speak up loudly when you have a comment, if you're capable, if you can. Brother Chris is basically saying we need to stay in shape. We need to be aware of this battle between good and evil within ourselves, between the flesh and the spirit. And it made me, what he was saying, made me think that we seem to have more triggers to activate our worldly, fleshly response than we do for the spiritual trigger toward God. It takes an effort for us to find a Christian radio, and while we're listening, we might correct what they're saying in our mind, or we might underline what they're saying for future reference in our studies. We have to make an effort to read the Bible. We have to make an effort when we hear a Christian song, like say I listen to Praise and Harmony on YouTube in the morning, a cappella, and to sing the words with them. We have to make an effort. But on the other hand, the world doesn't have to make an effort or not. I was raised in Florida. You have to make an effort to resist what those bathing suits did back then. And I hate to think what they do to the young Christian boys nowadays. the commercials you see on TV. It makes it easy for you, the worldly thinking. It makes it easy for you to think worldly thoughts like, well, I don't see anything wrong with it. Somebody who wants to have an operation and be something else. I guess next they'll be having, well, I think they do have tattoos where they can make you look like a cat. And there's probably been an operation where they might have give themselves cat ears. But I mean, where does it stop? There's all kinds of triggers that will sling you into worldly mindset. It takes an extreme effort. That's why you've got to stay in shape. And Paul is encouraging them to be aware of these things that they just did automatically because of the way they were raised, the way they always did things there. Thought crossed my mind about Galatia. It's like, that was like a good place to be. That was like the internet. And a lot of people went through that area. And the Galatian church needed to get it right so that the right information will be spread out from those parts as people go passing through. Just a side thought. So there seems to be three categories of these worldly sins. There's sensual. The author of this lesson book calls it sexual impurities, but you could just say sensual. Then there's the spiritual, which he calls the sins of false religion. And then the last one was social, because it was sin, as the author says, against brotherly love. So it'd be so much simpler, seeing how Brother Chris has put our minds in the right place to deal with anger and its side effects, that you could apply this to a lot of the other things too. You need to be aware of it. You need to know what your sensor gauge is reading as the sensor light came on in your life. So it would really eat up the time to go through all of these. So in these three categories, in the first category of sensual, there's like four things. I noticed that fornication brings up the thought that the Greek word is in the Textus Receptus, from which the King James Version was translated. It is not in some of the better Greek manuscripts. I don't know whether I would agree with him whether it was better or not, and therefore is not included in recent translations. And there's another word, let's see, later on, same thing is pretty much said about murders. On page 64, about halfway down, it says murders. The word is found in the Alexandrian manuscript. But like the word adultery, it does not appear in some of the better manuscripts. I don't know, I've been raised to think that there are three main manuscripts: the Alexandrian, the Egyptian, and the Vatican. And then between these three, we have a pretty good idea. It's not like a majority rules, because we have other things to go by, like the letters of the first century so-called fathers in their letters that they wrote, whether they mention certain things that confirm which one of these main ones they're using. So we have to be careful. I guess I'm sidetracking too much, but we need to be careful about what translation we are using. I use a number of translations. I try to read what the lesson's about from the translations and get a mindset of what's going on, how much flexibility there is, what's nailed down, and then I might go to other things. I might look up certain words which I did for all these words listed, just to make sure I had a thorough understanding of what the actual word meant. Like and that uncleanness, close to the bottom, about a third up from page 62, up from the bottom where it uses the word uncleanness. And when you look it up, it's like a wasteful, you're being wasteful using your resources. And you might remember that I tell you need to, well, God tells you need to take advantage of every good that you can do. Being able to talk to somebody about the gospel and their standing with God is an opportunity to do good. Here's a side note. I'm just grabbing it right out of the air. I had read that somebody had said people were created to worship God, love people, and use things. Not to use people, to love self and worship things. It really relates to what's going on in Galatia, because they've got so many things, so many creations that they are worshiping instead of the Creator. Well, somebody tell me what they think being led by the Spirit means. For those on YouTube that didn't hear what Brother Paul said, he's basically saying to live your life as a Christian. Let's see, I was thinking I could add something to that, but never mind. Brother Larry, what is it you had to say?
I was just thinking about the contrast between these two lists, the first and the flesh. These are things to avoid. These are, for the most part, they're black and white. We know evil. We see what's evil and we avoid it. But the list of this, walking by the Spirit is more something to work for, something to walk in, something to strive for. And we need help with that. We need the help of the Word of God. We need the help of the living Word in striving for those things.
Yeah, he's making reference to next week's lesson, so it don't matter whether you heard him or not. I mean, it does matter. He is soft-spoken. And it's one of the things, the fruits of the Spirit is what I made sure that my children knew. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. King James, I think. That's what's confusing about all these different versions. You learn things growing up, and they might change a word, and it might be a better word, but I still stuck in my mind, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. I used to say the books of the Bible that fast. Yes, it is a proper comparison, and it may not be complete, because if it's righteous, you know it's righteous, and you could recognize it's righteous. By the same token, you can compare, which was Brother Larry's key word, comparing these two lists, and you will recognize what is unrighteous, which is not right. I've come in situations where people were unscripturally married, and they talked to one preacher that laid it out, or a personal worker that laid it out like the scriptures put it, and they felt like they had to do something about their relationship. They had to separate and get right with God. But then they talked to another so-called personal worker who said what they wanted to hear. Oh, you can stay together. This was before you become a Christian. How, as if marriage is a completely different obligation than becoming a Christian, that you're not held up for your past sins. Sure, you're forgiven, but when if you're forgiven for being an alcoholic and you still go out and become an alcoholic, it just complicates things too much. Maybe I better get back to the list. So, was there anything? Let me see if there's anything I need to say. Led by the Spirit, not by your feelings. What?
So, your question was it mean to walk in the Spirit?
Yeah.
Ephesians, chapter 6, we're told, pick up the sword of the Spirit. Chapter 6, verse 17. And take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. So we know that the sword of the Spirit is the Word of God. If we're walking in the Spirit, same Spirit, right? We're walking in the way that God has told us we should walk. One thing about this whole list that you're bringing up, Paul himself tells us right here in these verses. In verse 17 at the very end, so that you do not do the things that you wish. Now over in Ephesians it's talking about putting on all these things so that we're ready to go into battle. And just what Brother Chris said a few minutes ago, Paul says here, that war is going on. It's just which side are you going to be on? Are you going to take up those things that God has given us, that we are to do, the people we are to be? And you know, these three areas that you're talking about that he's got in the book, he doesn't want to leave anything up to chance. He gives them this list, right? So that they can see right on. These are things that they want to do, right? Is mean, but you're not to do. I think it, you know, he lays out right there in the first verse what we're supposed to do. Then he talks about why, and he says, here are those things that you shouldn't do. And he lays out what, you know, a Christian should be. But another point on what you were talking about, what the authors in the book said about, you know, these words being left out, Paul covers that anyway. Take them out. It says, now the works of the, in this verse 19, now the works of the flesh are evident. Even if they weren't in that list, which they are, he says, the works of the flesh are evident. You know they're ungodly. And that's what he's trying to get across to them here. And then he goes on, like next week we'll talk about what the real walking in the Spirit looks like. Just this week was what it's not supposed to look like, right?
Well, I hope YouTube heard all that, because he done said so much I can't remember what he said. He was. Can you put it in a sentence? You had 2 points. Point one was,
The Word of God is what we are walking.
okay, so he was underlining what was said earlier about the idea that if it's righteous, you'll know it, because you're born with the ability to determine what the right thing to do is, and specifically it comes from the Word of God. It's like a starter course, and you can go on from there, and even though it may not say certain things that this author, this lesson book says is not in the original text, still it could be implied. Any good work that you can do. Doesn't say to help an old lady cross the street, but yet you help an old lady cross the street. You're laying up treasure in heaven. And your second point was?
If you're walking in the Word of God, you're living it, you can see what's wrong.
Yeah, that was
What he did here in these few verses.
that was a thought that I had too. Brother Chris continues with point number 2 is walking in the Spirit is an activity. You don't just one and done, once saved, always saved. It's a continual walking in righteousness. Yes, Ash? Wait a minute. Let me turn the speaker around.
I don't know that I necessarily agree with the statement, if it's righteous, you'll know, because Saul, when he was persecuting Christians, did everything in good conscience. It wasn't a sin to him until he knew right from wrong. So I think we have to be careful in assuming that everyone who's living an unrighteous life should know better. There's a lot of people that grow up terrible and have no idea that the way that they're living or the way that they were brought up is contrary to anything until they learn the truth. And I also think we tend to look at the list of all the bad stuff.
Hang on. Ashley's first point was that you are the result, you are a product of your environment.
No, I didn't say that.
I know you didn't. I was thinking it. You were saying it if, well, okay,
No, that's your.
correct me.
I didn't say that.
Okay.
No, the second thing is I think that we tend
She didn't say
to
it.
look at the list of all the bad things and compare it to the good things, and we think, well, if I check all the bad things and I'm not doing any of that, then I'm living a righteous life. But it is very difficult to live in love and joy and be long-suffering and be self-controlled, and I think that we often look at the fruit of the Spirit as something that's really easy to obtain. It's a lifelong battle as Christians. Anybody you talk to, no matter what age, all they tell you is that they're constantly striving to walk in the Spirit, because it's not just this happy-go-lucky, skippy thing that I've obtained the fruit of the Spirit. I think we will all go to our graves still trying, because it's so difficult, and I don't know that we necessarily talk about that enough, that it's not something easy to obtain. It takes a lot of work.
Right, and that's why we got to stay in shape. But back to your first point, children naturally get along together, no matter red, yellow, black and white, male or female, whatever, different language, they can get along. And that's why I lean towards being a child. You know, it comes naturally to you. Now, you're right in respect that a child might eat mud that has to learn from experience. So yes, maybe I did go overboard saying you're a product of your environment. Basically, you are susceptible to what you have been taught. And if you haven't been taught enough, such as these are the fruits of the Spirit, these are the guides that next week somebody will be teaching about, these are the signals that will let you know you're on the right track. Just like these signals this week tells you if you need to get in shape, need to work on it. We had a good lesson today on dealing with anger. Thank you, Sister Ashley. Sister Pat, you have something?
So I think both of these, when Paul's talking about these Galatians, he puts both of these in contrast so that there's a clear understanding of which path to go that's righteous before God. But in naming these works of the flesh, it's not that you just know that you're doing works of the flesh. I think because of the way he contrasted, it shows that the works of the flesh are shown to all. You have fruit of the flesh that's not good. You know, you have all these behaviors and other people see it. You know, it's not just you. You're producing that kind of behavior for others, as opposed to the fruit of the Spirit that keeps growing, and that's what keeps us encouraged and on the right path. Good encourages good. Bad encourages bad.
Thank you for your comment. Key phrase. It escaped me. Key phrase. Oh, people see what fruit you're producing. And Paul saw these fruit, and he had to point it out to them. Was there any particular fruit of the flesh that someone here has trouble dealing with, not necessarily in their own life, but with somebody they work with or at family reunions or bell ringing? The one I find is the drunkenness. How can you explain to a drunk that it's bad for you? First of all, they don't want to hear it. That's like telling a pothead, you can't be doing that. It's going to affect you in later life. Ha, 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 ha. It's good time. I'll deal with it then. Whether you're drunk or high, there are long-term effects. Well, before we leave this, I want to go to the about a third up from page 64. Under the category of drunkenness, the last half of that, I've always thought was a great scripture towards curtailing any of your unrestrained indulgences, whether it's immorality or loss of soberness, sober mind. Okay, it says, starting with the quotation mark, abstain from the appearance of evil. 1 Thessalonians 5, 21, 22. And then it says, point 2, he will not do that which may influence another to sin. 1 Corinthians 8, 9 through 13. And 3, now we're talking about drunkenness. Most importantly, social drinking is in itself condemned in 1 Peter 4, verses 1 through 3, where drinking parties is specified in addition to drunkenness and carousels. You know, there's some things that it appears to be evil, and it may not actually be evil. But yet, because of brotherly love that we hit on at the end of last week's lesson, because of brotherly love, you should be willing to stop doing that, give them a chance to adjust. I don't know that you would stop doing something that is perfectly harmless for forever. You certainly would try not to do it around them. But the important thing is abstain from the appearances of evil. My wife tells me I should be buttoning up my top button of my shirt. I guess in Florida that's not an appearance of evil, but in Tennessee it's kind of an appearance of evil. So forgive me if I accidentally didn't check to see if my top button was buttoned. Is there any more comment about this abstaining from appearances of evil, how it might affect people? We've already kind of covered it vaguely.
You know, I'll give you this comment. We sometimes accept things when we're in certain groups that we wouldn't accept in others. If you're in one of those groups that's doing something wrong, think about how it's taken by everybody that's in that group. Okay?
And at the level of your presentation, it may be innocent, but yet, hey, that's a start. You know, we'll do this. We can get closer to the fire.
And not only that, but you think back, you know, being seen, these meats eaten from
Idols?
sacrifices
Yeah.
to idols, and how it could cause that brother to sin. We've got to make sure that we don't give an appearance that what we're doing is okay. Because if we do, we may cause them to sin because now they think it's okay.
Cuss words is a good example of that. And some people, I remember the first time I heard a Christian man when I was a teenager say a cuss word, I says, Brother so-and-so, do you think that's wrong to say that? And he says, I was raised on a farm and we called you know what, you know what. So I guess that kind of affected me, thinking that there is a loose standard that can be applied, but yet it was an appearance of evil to me, and he should have dealt with me in a different way.
But it goes back to what Ashley was talking about. He said that's what it was called
Right.
when he was there.
Yeah.
Once you find out that, you know, filthy talking and coarse speech isn't acceptable, from that point on, you ought to strive to change it. Walk in the Spirit, what the lesson was about today.
Right. There was another verse that came to mind.
Does it exhibit godliness? That should be the question we ask if somebody brings it up.
Well, the bell's probably going to ring before I can find it. Well, anyhow, we pretty much covered all this, and I had a few comments on question number 2. In what way is the flesh contrary to the spirit? It's like gas and water. You got to put some alcohol in it and make it blend together. But that's blending it together, and alcohol ain't the solution. Only if you're using your lawnmower. But, gas and water do not mix, like the spirit and the flesh. Then, of course, question 3 says, all who are led by the Spirit are under what? And they're under the law. But I had a thought. I'm an outdoorsman of sorts. And I think it's when I go through the uncharted woods, I will see like a ravine. And I think to myself, boy, that looks kind of tough. And I'll walk along the edge of the ravine until I see what seems to be a deer trail that'll more than likely be an easier way to get across the ravine. And it turns out to be so. So being led by the Spirit is like following the trails that have been etched in the woods. It'll give you easier passage, perhaps through briars or streams or other kind of difficulties that living in the Spirit may present. But remember, it all boils down to your decision. Your decision to develop fruits of the Spirit, and your decision to manicure the source of this fruit of the Spirit. And before you know it, you and I can have a race. We can see who can say the fastest: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. I'll give you $1 if you can say it faster than me. Thank you for your time.